Good morning, everybody. Well, good morning for us doing it live, and good afternoon or good evening to anybody else that's watching it retrospectively. So welcome again to another webinar. I'm joined today by Steve Lindsay again. Hi, Steve.
Good morning, everybody. Or good whatever.
Yeah, and by Mr. Clark, Adrian. Good morning.
Good morning.
We've got a good one today, guys. I mean, we've done stuff on first-time fixed rate before, but we've really focused from a software perspective and from a process perspective on, I guess, things that impact it. But I think, although that brought up a lot of conversation, which we've subsequently had with prospects and customers, I think one of the things that we realized is that actually more people than we think actually are unsure about how to calculate their first time fixed rate, which seems bizarre because it seems like a very simplistic calculation. So I guess we'll get onto that. But people don't have the means to calculate it and therefore unable to benchmark themselves. Is that fair reflection, Steve?
Yeah, I think often people understand that it's important, but for challenges in collecting data and reporting on it, they often don't have that information. And if they do have it, it's often after the fact as well, rather than being in real time. So yeah, it's something that I think there's a general awareness that it is important, and we can discuss some of the details why it's important in a second. But yeah, I think it's a challenge just being able to quickly and easily understand and measure and manage what your first time fix is.
Yeah, indeed. Well, obviously that's what we're going to get into today. So how to actually calculate first time fixed rate. And we've got a couple of slides. We'll talk through what's important here, and then we're going to have a look how we capture it in the software as well, aren't we? Why is first time fixed rate important? Well, this is going to some people sound blatantly obvious, and maybe to others there'll be things that they don't consider. I'm going to kick off by saying it's important because these days everyone's trying to focus on customer retention, and obviously first time fixed rate is a direct measurable way of determining how good the service is that you provide to your customers, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of markets or sectors, they'll specify or assess your performance based on your first time fixed rate. Obviously, if you're a customer and you want your equipment running and being utilized as much as possible, having it down, and if you have got an issue, getting that issue resolved quickly as possible is very important for customers. So I think it's it's an important measure for for companies that service and repair equipment, but obviously for the end customer as well. It's very important that they get things fixed quickly and possible and get their plant up and running and making them money.
Yeah, indeed. And I think the important word that you used there was measure, because I think when we speak to service-led organizations, what we try and help them do at this point is we try and help them measure the benefit of increasing the first time fixed rate, don't we? And one of the thing is, it's a double win, isn't it? Because you've got, not only have you got the money that you're saving internally by only visiting the site and completing the work once, but also you then got the knock-on effect of, if you have got an engineer going to a site more than once, if you can negate that, if you can remove it, what are they doing instead? So not only are you saving the cost of the second visit in this example, but also that engineer is on site somewhere else doing something potentially billable. So you've got both sides of the coin there, both are wins, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you've got an engineer that turns up to site and they can't fix it first time, you've got an unhappy customer that's got a piece of equipment that they're waiting to get fixed. So they're waiting for another engineer to come back. So you've got an unhappy customer there. And from the point of the service company, you've got the fuel cost of going back to that site, and we all know what fuel cost has been. Is probably keeping that down is as important as ever. You've got an engineer's time and effort to go back there, and that's billable time. That's time that could be billed for another job, to generate more revenue, and often it could be another cost that's going on to a service contract. So there's sort of losses from all parts of the process.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Well, let's move on to what does good look like, and we've got a guide here to help us through this area, haven't we? There it is. Yeah. So this is an e-guide that's been written, which is, we're only going to have a look at a couple of areas of it today, but just to let everybody know it is available for them. I think Adrian's just posted it in the chat. So this is available to download. It is really useful. Then I would say that because I had a hand in writing it. But the areas we're going to focus on specifically are going to be what we just said. So what does good look like? So what we're looking at here, I think, is there's a lot of numbers on there, but the one that stands out to me is the industry average. So we're saying that 77% first time fix rate is the average. I think based on the people that we speak to, some people might think that's high.
I think the key challenge is, I suppose, thinking about it, whether the companies that do have a grip on their first time fix, so do know have a figure for that, are probably companies that focus on it and improve on it and manage it correctly, and often maybe that's a little bit skewed with regards to a lot of people don't know what their first time fix rate is, and hence that might be a little lower in reality.
Yeah, and this is the key to where we were going with this area, wasn't it? Is actually a lot of people we speak to, they don't really know what it's a best guess, or more accurately, probably, or more commonly, they try to measure it, but they don't have any confidence in the numbers for various reasons. But ultimately, and that's obviously what we do, is they're not confident in what is providing the numbers and where that data is coming from. So that's a problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of mistrust, or the fact that the information on first time fix, really your first point of collecting that is from the engineer themselves. So you've got to have some sort of a level and trust in your engineers that they are reporting things correctly.
Yes.
On when they're in the field. So I think there's a little bit of people can be dubious sometimes if they're constantly being told that their engineers are saying that they're fixing everything first time, when maybe in reality they're not. So I think that's something to consider. So you've been able to trust your engineers that they're telling you the right thing when they're in the field. And the other thing is being able to collect that in real time, and drill into that information. So is it being fixed first time, yes or no? If it hasn't been fixed first time, then what are the reasons behind that, and then capturing that as well at that point, and being able to have some information to actually make some changes and act upon.
Yeah, that information is really important moving forward, to make sure that other people can fix similar problems first time the next time that sort of issue occurs, isn't it?
It is, and I think often you can have a situation where you fix a piece of equipment and then it breaks down an hour after the engineers left site as well. So it's how do you pick up that, and how big of how often does that happen, and how big an impact does that have on the first time fix rate?
Yeah, and it's also important to remember there's no one magic bullet to increasing that number, because there are so many factors that can impact your first time fix. Again, having real visibility of what's going on in the business will guide you as to which areas you need to focus on.
Yeah, well, a bit later we're going to get on to the things that contribute to the first time fixed rate, as in the reasons why things aren't fixed first time. I think for some people there may be surprises in that information. For others, maybe not. But just going back to this before we move on, bottom left, again, you know, we can see a clear, what that demonstrates, what it proves is there is a clear correlation between the first time fixed rates and retention, and also revenue growth. So what we're saying there is that if the first time fixed rate is less than 70%, then that has a direct impact on customer retention for obvious reasons. I mean, we said this before, haven't we? And we say it quite often, you know, when we're not in these kind of forums, but gone are the days where people went with a service provider and just stayed with them for 10, 15, 20 years because that's what they did. That kind of loyalty is no longer there in lots of places. And people are held to account much more robustly. And therefore, if they're not given a great service, people will move now, won't they? They will, you know, they will have a contract for 12 months. And if it's not working to their expectations, they will move on to somebody else, because it's such a competitive area, service-led industries as well, isn't it, generally?
It is, and it comes down to, we've mentioned around the impact of a low first-time fixed rates have on efficiency and cost within the service business. But from the growth and from a sales perspective, you know, customers nowadays are used to having information and key performance indicators and service level agreements, and having that information at the tip of their fingers to make decisions, investment decisions on which partner they're going through. So I've dealt with companies which they know they're giving a very good service to their customers. They know that they've got a good first time fixed rate, but they find it difficult to actually measure it and prove it, and back it up and share that information in a format which their customers trust as well. So you only have to share a first time fix or a metric with a customer, and if that's discounted for any reason, then there's a level of trust that you lose as well.
Yeah, I think it's a very good point, that, Steve, because we're all the same as, you know, as businesses and consumers. Is you have one bad experience with a supplier, then that's what sticks in your mind. If you're the service provider and you want to go and demonstrate that actually your service 99 times out of 100 is impeccable, you'll try and often you're firefighting to disprove the 1 in 100, aren't you, where things didn't go quite according to plan, which is always going to happen in any industry. So actually having the metrics to back that up is really important, and not being able to means then you're just having a conversation about how good you are rather than being able to demonstrate it.
Absolutely.
That's a good point. Look, time again is going to get away from us, guys. Go on, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, can you guys, I've changed across to the software there. Can you guys see that on the screen? Okay, brilliant. So that leads us nicely into capturing that first time fix information in real time. And we've discussed the areas where it impacts from an efficiency and cost point of view within the business, but also impacts your relationships with your customers as well. So being able to monitor in real time, I use this far too often, but it stuck with me from one of my first managers in the 90s. You can't manage what you can't measure. Mm-hmm. So being able to get live figures around your performance in the field and how that impacts different things is very important. So what I'm showing here is a dashboard within Service Genie. So this is actually unique to me. So I can have different reports, different key performance indicators depending on my role. But just for the purposes of the topics today, we've just pulled out some example metrics that it may be relevant for people to monitor. So we've got a high level metric of a first time fixed percentage for the business as a whole. So these three here, this one below, and this one looking at the first time fixed rate by engineer, they're all around improving efficiencies and reducing cost within the operations. And I'll drill into those in a little bit more detail. And then the third one at the bottom here is actually our first time fixed performance for individual customers. So, you know, we're managing in real time. We're monitoring, looking at the figures here. See, some are low, some are high, of our performance against our key customers. So it's very, you know, if things are going the wrong way, then we can start addressing them before they become an issue with the customer. So
yeah, it's really interesting that the way you split them down, because as you were talking about them, I was thinking, God, there's so many different things in that information. So if you take the customer one, yeah, your initial kind of response to it is, oh well, I need to go and look at a customer that's got a poor first time fix rate because they might be unhappy. But actually, there's also the flip side to that is, and again, we'll get on to the reasons, but actually it could be partly their fault that the first time fix rate is low. And actually it could be a particular customer or two that's tanking your overall first time fix rate.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah,
you know, if you've got a first time fix rate that you want to improve, you think it's lower than it should be, and you're striving to improve it, then actually not just knowing, you do need to know what it is overall, but that's only the very, as you said, the high level stuff. You then do need to understand the detail, because if I've got one specific customer that's letting us down, I need to know why. That's where you're going to go and drill in and see, well, what are the reasons why the rate is lower for them than it is for everybody else? Because if everybody else is hitting 75%, but one of your customers is hitting 60%, then it's likely that they are contributing to that lower figure.
Yeah. And then with these being live reports, but also reports that you can drill down into, you can look at your performance. So maybe I'll want to look at our performance versus last year. So I can change this and see, actually last year we had a much higher first time fix rate. So we can start asking questions why. And here you mentioned some really interesting things around what measuring first time fix by customer gives you, and I'd also just like to spend a little bit of time of the benefit of looking at a first time fix by engineer as an example as well.
Yeah.
So you can start assessing your engineers' performance, you know, not just to beat them around the head, but to identify, you know, what are the reasons for that, and are there training opportunities? Is there an engineer that's doing something particularly better, or have they got a better stock profile? We'll come into some of the reasons why, but you know, having an understanding of who your best performing engineers are. And again, you can drill down into here. So we'll look at Adrian here's got was quite a high percentage of fixes which he hasn't done first time, so we can maybe drill down into that and understand which customers were they with, and then look into those ones that they were particularly high with. Is there a particular piece of equipment or an asset that there's been an issue with? So of all those issues at that particular customer, you know, a big chunk of these issues where we've not been fixing first time have been on 2 pieces of equipment. So you can sort of drill down into the information behind this. It's not just I think that's really important, because often with reports, you know, we come across this all the time. They're run once, they're flat, and they often say highlight things that you need more information on. So you have to go and collect more data, run another report to understand what the reason is. So
that was really impressive, Steve. I've got to say, that's the first time I've seen that specific report. That was really impressive the way you drilled into it, because you're right, you need to see the data behind it. Otherwise, it's telling you you've got a problem, but it's not offering you the way to find a solution. And that's what drilling into the data ultimately does. It takes you to the solution. It doesn't just highlight the problem, and that there's a big difference between the two.
Absolutely.
I've noticed my first time fix rate's not very good though. I can't say I'm particularly happy about that.
Yeah, I don't think you're not a big user of this. You're not a big fixer. I think it's that one job we've assessed you on there, Gary. So we'll let you off. Okay, so we drill down into some of the reasons. Let's just have a look at the agenda of. We've sort of covered these areas, I think, around why it's important. You know, what does good look like? The importance of being able to measure quickly in real time where you are now. So we spend a little bit of time on some of the factors that that I found really interesting around what actually impacts a first time fix. I don't know if you want to drill into some of this, Gary.
Well, I was about to jump in
sorry.
earlier and mention about the parts, because that's probably got to be one of the biggest reasons for not fixing things first time, and obviously it's right at the top of the list then.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, to us, it's not really surprising. Many people listening or watching it probably won't be to them either, because obviously, you know, they're doing this day in, day out. But when somebody actually shows you the numbers, I think it can be quite shocking. It was for me when I first saw this. So what we're saying is 57% is parts unavailability and the asset not being available. So you're saying 28% of that is potentially not the fault of the service provider. I mean, that's a huge volume. That has a huge impact on your first time fix rate, as does parts unavailability. And that is something, look, the parts unavailability stuff, I mean, the advantage that we have, the privilege that we have doing what we do is we speak to so many different service-led organizations, whereas the people working in them, they know their own business infinitely better than we do. Everybody that we speak to knows their business infinitely better than we do, but we're in quite a privileged position in that we speak to so many of them. So we see the recurring themes, don't we? And issues with managing parts generally is something that is consistent across pretty much everybody that we speak to, that they would like to do it better. And here, what we're showing them and what we're saying is, yeah, you're right to think that there's improvements to be had there, and you're right to think that there's potentially an issue, because this says, yeah, absolutely, nearly 30% of work that doesn't hit a first-time fix is due to parts unavailability. And the truth is, this is going to sound harsh, but I would argue that with the type of technology that's available today, that a number that high in a service-led business is it's unforgivable, really. I mean, it is, because people don't have the tools, but the tools are there. That's the point that we're making, isn't it? Is that it doesn't have to be this.
yeah, and I think parts is something that we come across regularly, and I think it's probably there's some extra pressure on getting the right parts at the right place at the right time at the moment, with supply chain issues and lead times and so on. So being able to manage that better is a challenge which a lot of companies struggle with. I think there's two things that jump out of there that surprised me a little bit. Is, like you said, you've already mentioned, Guy, that you know, nearly a third of the reasons, or third of the reasons why you don't fix things first time is because you've not had access to the asset, so it's not your reason. So when it coming to renewal time on your contract, being beaten up by your customer for not fixing first times, and actually in reality a lot of those because they've not got the right access to site is really important. So, you know, what can you do to make sure that that doesn't happen? And the other bit was, for me, that jumped out was this was the bottom one, that the resolution was only temporary. So often when I'm talking about first time fix rates with customers, that I mentioned this earlier, is there's often a trepidation about whether they can collect the right information from the engineer in the field, and whether things are, you know, a temporary fix or not. But actually this is telling us that that doesn't happen a lot. It's, you know, there's much more important things to focus on.
Yeah, it's still a high number, 8%, but relative to some of the others, yeah, you know, you're absolutely right. You know, engineer not having the right skills, that's a common one, as illustrated there. Improper diagnosis at time of dispatch. I mean, that's again, it's understandable, isn't it? There are ways we can mitigate all of these issues, but you know, you can see how it happens. I mean, when we were talking in a couple of minutes ago about the first time fix rate by individual customer, that's where I was leading. Obviously, I knew that we were going on to this slide next. Is if you have got a particular customer that's tanking your first time fix rate, then them not making the asset available is probably the reason.
Yeah,
you know, these all make sense and marry up. So it's more about how do we mitigate it? But I'm just doing the numbers. I mean, what, 57% in those top two. So if you've got a first time fix rate of say 60%, then by dealing with that, you're adding another 20% at least, aren't you? You're adding another 20% onto your first time fix rate just by dealing with that. Now, of course, you're never going to deal with all of that. You know, there's always going to be an element of those things. But you've got a potential uplift of 20% just in managing those bits of the process better by reducing that number, which is huge.
Yeah, and I think what I'll do is I'll jump into Service Genie R software just to show how you can sort of work to mitigate some of the risks of some of these areas, or control them as much as possible. So I'm not going to do a full software demonstration though, but you can contact us if you want to see the software in more detail, of course. But I'm actually going to drill specifically on those areas around preventing. It's all about getting the right person to the right place at the right time with the right parts, as simple as that. So this is what we call service calls. So this is a screen to give the person that's responding to the customer in the first instance, and giving that person the first line response as much information as possible to do some of that first level diagnosis. So we've got a set of customers here, and underneath the customers we've got details around the assets that are on this particular customer's site. We've got prompts telling us things that we need to know, and that is important because it can address things like getting access to the site, or turning up to the site and not having the right equipment, the right tools. So being able to store that information against a particular customer site, and have visibility of it here, but it'll also show you how it pops up and gives you visibility when you try and book a job for a customer as well. It's really important. And also typically we find that people are at the end of the phone, or picking up the phone calls from the customer, or an email that something's broken and needs fixing. They quite often not the technical people in the business. The technical people in the business are out fixing stuff. So it's really important for a non-technical person to get as much information around that customer, that asset, what might potentially be wrong, have gone wrong, before issuing it to or diagnosing and triaging it and issuing it to the right person.
The other thing, sorry to interject, Steve, on that one is, it is also accepted that when the customer rings in, they very rarely give the full picture.
It's true. It's often it's the red one in the yard that's broken.
Yeah, exactly. And they might have had an engineer out 2 days ago to it, but they'll communicate as little information as possible to the person who's picked up the phone. So it's what we're talking about here is actually giving access to the information that the scheduler needs, rather than relying on the information that they're getting from the customer. Because if you're relying on that, then you've got a problem.
Yeah, and this screen pulls a lot of information from a lot of different areas to give the controller as much information as possible. But for the purposes of focusing on the first time fix rate today, I'm just going to look at what we call the history. So this is the history of any particular repair service job that's taken place at that site or on that particular asset, and understanding what's happened previously in order to make decisions on potentially what the best solution is, the most efficient way of fixing it. So straight away, I've looked here. I actually logged a job on this site earlier this morning, so it's telling me at 8 o'clock this morning we actually had a call already on this site. So somebody's already been, or a call's already been logged. It's telling me that call was completed, and this is what we completed when we were on site as well. So we replaced the filter. It's running smoothly. So if we're getting another call for this, then maybe it's something's gone wrong where we've replaced the filter. So it's,
yeah, I've got to say, taking the call, getting on site and fixing it in less than 2 hours is pretty impressive.
I raced it this morning, so it's probably not a real world example, but nevertheless it tells you that you've got visibility of what's happened on that particular site. You can drill down into the job itself and look at the full details, all the service sheets, the job sheets and so on, but you also can look at the parts history. So we've got a view of what parts have been used on there recently. So again, that might give us an angle of what potentially might have gone wrong, or what we might need to consider moving forward. And also we've got the quotation history. So you know, if it's a problem with the masts, well, we did a quote already for replacing the masts. So, you know, something that, again, that the controller's got some really valuable information about, access to that to help make sure when we send the person, we're sending the right person with the right pieces of tools and parts to potentially fix that first time. So there's some really good information that you've got visibility in a single clip. And also I'm going to actually, just for the purposes of demonstration, raise a particular job. And rather than having to go and look for the information, it's telling the controller that we do need an access permit to get onto site here. So these are the sort of areas where you can start addressing turning up to site and not getting access to the particular equipment. There may be 100 different reasons why, but you know, you don't want that to keep on happening. So if it happens once, you know, enter it into the system, and the system will help you prevent that happening again.
Yeah,
so,
and I guess it could be, there's various things you could use those prompts for, including, sounds pretty simplistic, but if you know you have an issue being turned away from site, which happens fairly often, of reminding the operator or the scheduler to check, I guess, to check that they will be able to get access with the customer before they dispatch the engineer out, to ensure that they give them a call. You know, we're talking about software and automation, all manner of things, but actually just being reminded to say to the scheduler, before you send the engineer out, make sure that you ring them up and say, we're coming to site, are we going to be able to get access?
Absolutely. And we'll talk about, we mentioned there, this is just an example. You need a risk assessment and method statement. You could, it's a very small detail, but you can set up for this job. We know that if we go to that particular site, that we need a risk assessment, so you can link the access forms, you know, the permits that you require to the job as well, so that they're automatically populated on the job and can be filled out by the engineer. And again, you've got the right form to get access. So it's a small point there. Yeah, I think I've probably covered that. We also mentioned one of the key things that was listed is around getting the right person. So getting the person that's got the right accreditations to work on that particular piece of equipment, to work on that particular site, the right skill sets to do that, potentially to work. So it could be mechanical, electrical, and so on. So being able to have visibility when you're booking the job of the skills and the accreditations that each engineer that has, and being prompted with those is very important, again, just to make sure that you're sending the right person. And
yeah,
the person's got...
Sorry, mate, I was just going to say, it's interesting that, because you're right. I've got to be honest, I have, you know, in the last few years, it is more common to speak to people about this stuff, and for individual sites to have specific kind of health and safety training. So if they've got an engineer coming to site, you must have done the health and safety training that's determined by your customer, not by your own. You might have your own risk assessment, but even I've been to sites where I have to sit through some health and safety video or some health and safety training in order to be able to access site, and that is becoming much more common. And it's also it's a reason that an engineer would get turned away that is very simply dealt with, isn't it, in being mitigated by something like this.
Yeah, and the devil's in the detail, like you say. I've been to nuclear sites and so on, and production plants that you need to do the onboarding sites system, and that accreditation only lasts for a certain length of time as well, so you often have expiry dates on there. So you know, you can turn up to site and you think you've got the right accreditation, but then you realize it's actually expired and things like that. So being here to be able to get visibility of that and manage that and push that to the controller when they're selecting who's the best engineer for that job is really important to sort of mitigate those areas. So we've got got examples of, you know, if you're visiting a school or university, that you have to have the proper police checks in place, and, you know, a proper accreditations or qualifications to work on pieces of equipment. And you can link these skill sets to pieces of equipment as well, so the system knows if you're going to that site and you're working on that piece of equipment, you need these skill sets, so you can sort of it prompts you and make sure that it highlights when you've not got the right qualifications, or the engineer's not got the right qualifications to work on that piece of equipment.
All these things are, you know, going back to all the reasons that affect a first time fix rate. We're chipping away at them, aren't we? That's what we're doing. We're chipping away at each one and saying there are ways, there are processes that are pretty simplistic that will keep chipping away and knocking this number down and down and down. And everything that you chip down here is going to, on the previous screen, is going to put your first time fix rate up. And we've talked about the benefits of that.
Yes, we've just touched of ways of mitigating these three in the middle. The one thing that we've missed out so far, it was probably that at the top of the tree, is actually getting the right right part at the right place at the right time as well. And that's a whole topic in itself. And I know we've got other webinars which go into some of the details here. But this is something I've had a recent conversation with a company that's got 100+ engineers out on the road, and understanding it's not just having the right parts in stock or getting it at the right time, but the ideal, I guess, is that the engineers have the right part always on their van, in their van stock. So understanding what is the best profile, or optimizing that the stock levels for each of those parts on the van is very important, and goes, I guess, quite a long way to making sure you got the right part when you're on the job.
That is, I mean, it's easy to see why, and I know it was top, but you know, that is what we hear all the time. Even the figures back it up, but even anecdotally, what we hear is the most common reason that people don't fix a piece of equipment first time is because the engineer goes to site, identifies the issue, needs a part, doesn't have it. It's as simple as that, isn't it?
Yeah, and sorry, I was just sort of drilling down on a particular customer I was talking to. They have 100+ engineers, but actually their engineers deal with a different profile of customer depending on the area and their customer base. So actually understanding what is their optimum profile needs to be done at an engineer level.
Yeah.
So and this is just as an example of how you can get information to start making decisions on what the best stock profile looks at. So it can be as basic as, you know, what does that engineer typically use in a month or a year? And we've got a graph here which shows the total as a complete business, what are the fastest moving parts. So we've got a very clear picture of the parts that have been used the most within the business. But we also can start drilling down into particular engineers. So actually, for Adrian Clark, he may deal with 2 or 3 particular customers, and his stock profile looks very different, or what's an ideal stock profile for him looks very different to the rest of the business.
Yeah.
So you can start making very informed decisions around, you know, what does a good stock profile look like for each engineer, so that they do have the right part on the van when they need it.
I mean, as we said before, you know, that 29% or 28% or whatever it was, not having the correct part, we're never going to remove that, because you're always going to come up, you know, you might have slow moving parts. They're slow moving, but they're not non-existent. So you're always going to have occasions where the engineers turn up to site and they don't have the part, and that's understandable. Again, what we're talking about here is we're talking about ways that you move the dial, aren't we? We're not saying you're going to get 100% first time fix rate, but what we're saying is if you're at 60, 65, 70, how do we move the dial and increase the number? And this is one of the main ways that you do it, is by allowing the system, in our example, to give you information that's going to have a direct impact on that area. So what we're saying here, I think, Steve, in summary, is we can identify the parts that are being used most frequently across the business, but also by individual engineers, so we can have profiles for those engineers. What we do then is we have a stock replenishment area where we can ensure that we always have enough parts in stock and on order to ensure a minimum quantity to meet the need of those fast moving items, so that every time we turn up on site, if it's a fast moving item that's going to be needed to fix that asset, we're going to have it.
That's the that's the ideal situation. Yeah, absolutely.
And you know, and the reality is, if people are not doing that, then that's having all of the negative consequences associated with it that we talked about today in the last half hour or so. And these are the areas that we use to move the dial, as I keep saying. Is there anything else you want to show on here?
That was it, I think, guys. Yeah, so
okay, good.
Just going back to
Excellent. I'm just I'm conscious on time because we will try and do 30 minutes. We always end up at least 40, and here we are today, done 40. So that's great. Look, that was brilliant, Steve. I think that gave us a good insight. As we said, the guide that we wrote, which is infinitely bigger than the couple of bits that we looked at today, is available. If people want to have a look at that, we'd be more than happy to share it with them. And equally, I guess, Steve, you would invite anybody to contact you if they've got any more questions about the little bits that we have seen today.
Yeah, and I think the first part of sort of suggested step would be actually to start right at the beginning and look at start measuring it for you in particular. We do have some tools to sort of to give you a much better understanding of what the real cost and impact of your current first time fixed rate is having on your business. So we have a commercial analysis tool to look at that in more detail. So yeah, if anybody's keen to try and work with us to look at measuring their current first time fix and what that's actually costing them, then yeah, our contact details are on the next slide actually. So yeah, please get in contact via that email, or yeah, I think that's one of my colleagues' mobile numbers, but you could give him a ring as well. So yeah, I'd welcome the chance to have any conversations with people that want to understand things further.
I don't think you've got much chance of forwarding those inquiries to you.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes,
thank
guys.
you to everybody that's joined us live today. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Steve. And thank you to everyone that watches it back at some point in the future. Yeah, if you want any more information, then please drop us a line and get in touch. We'd be delighted to try and help. Till then, we probably won't do another one till this is going to make no sense to people that are watching this in July next year. But for the record, it's just before Christmas. We're kind of second week of December. So to everyone else, Merry Christmas, and we'll see you again on the next one in the new year.
Take care,
Cheers, guys. Take care. Bye bye.